It's like the 4th of July. What's up guys, Dan here, Coalcracker. Today is going to be technical tips with Dan. We're gonna talk about these bad boys, the Ferro rod. I'm gonna get into a little bit more technical advice and know-how with this. Now this, because I'm doing that does not mean that this video is not going to be good for beginners or advanced people, right? It's gonna be good for everybody because from the beginner standpoint, it's really gonna give you a lot of clarification around one of the greatest survival fire starters to ever exist. And from an advanced level, it's going to give you a little bit more insight, and it's things that you should be thinking about when you are utilizing these things in an advanced setting. And then also we're going to talk a little bit about training backwards. So it'll all make sense here in a minute. This will be a fun one because this is the kind of stuff that I love to talk about. All right, so if you don't know already, Ferro rod, okay, is a rod that when it is scraped with a sharp edge and material is removed, the material that is being removed becomes pyrophoric with the air, okay? And that hot spark material that we create then in turn ignites, okay, something that we need to start the campfire. And that could be a variety of different things from what we have here, cotton balls and Vaseline, all the way up to something like inner bark of trees, which we would call a bird's nest, to flower tops, to dried grasses, to wood shavings, a ton of different stuff. They are super versatile tools, but you need to have a little bit of understanding around them. Now I did a lot of videos in the past with these, how to actually use them and different techniques and different scrapers and things like that. But what I'd like to talk about today is from a technical aspect, like what's actually going on with these rods and why when we talk about the Ferro rod, you see so many survival instructors and advanced level individuals utilizing the back spine of their knife versus using just one of these little thumb scrapers that you see so very often. The end game here is burn duration of that spark, okay? If you strike it and you get a little flick that looks like this, okay, that spark that's coming off there is the same material burning that if you go and you get a longer spark, okay? Temperature-wise, it's gonna probably be similar, but you have a longer duration. So the goal here is to get the longest duration spark we can off of these rods. And that's generally why we always say, hey, use a larger ferrocerium rod versus a smaller one, because number one, there's a lot more surface area on these rods. So when I scrape this, of course, I'm scraping a lot more material. A lot more material is going to equal a longer burn time. Compared to something like this, scrape it, less material, less burn time. So the longer burn time, where does that come into play? So the longer burn time is very important in a survival sense because of the fact that the material you're trying to ignite might not be optimal. So let's start on one end of the spectrum, okay? So we look at a small rod and we look at something like a finger striker here, okay? We strike it and we get a very short burn time in duration. And when we use stuff like this, the first thing that a lot of people start with, which is a great fire starter, is going to be cotton balls and Vaseline. The thing is with something like this, a very short duration spark will ignite this because this is like prime optimal material to ignite with the spark. So even the smallest of littlest of sparks makes this thing ignite. It starts to burn. The Vaseline's the extender. It just burns and we have a lot of flame for a long amount of time. So it's like, hey, this works, my ferro rod works great, I'm good to go. But as we progress and we get ourselves in different situations, or we run out of cotton balls and Vaseline and we move into more advanced settings and the weather becomes more adverse, we start to run into some issues with that short duration burn time. Now let's jump to the other end of the spectrum. So you're out, you don't have cotton balls and Vaseline, it's cold, it's rainy, okay? It's been rainy for days, maybe there's some wet snow on the ground, and you gather natural material like bark off of a tree. You process it down and you have something that looks like this, except it's damp. Those small duration sparks are just not burning long enough in order to dry out the material, and then make it combust into a flame. You can try and try and try, it is not going to happen. So we can combat that by removing more material off the rod and having a longer duration burn time. So where that comes into play is two things. Number one is a longer rod, okay, because we scrape it, we remove more material. We can also go a step further, and that is we can use more of our physical power to do that. And that's where something like a knife or the backside of a multi-tool saw come into play. Now, if I ask everybody here to go up to the wall in their house and generate as much power as you can into that wall, nobody is going to lay their hand against the wall and just snap it with their thumb and say, that's all the power I can generate. You're most likely going to use an open hand or a closed fist, and you're going to use the muscles in your arm and your back and your shoulder, and you're going to punch the wall as hard as you can, generating the most power that you can. And that's where, again, this stuff comes into play. When we use something small, like this striker, there's a lot of power that we're just getting out of our hand muscles and our thumb in order to make that actually strike. Now, yes, we can get super technical here and say, well, I'm pulling the rod back and I'm still using this motion, and this is just staying still. But in general, okay, this is going to be a lot weaker than something like this, okay? So when we go to the knife aspect of it, the knife handle is giving us somewhere to hold on to, and then it's allowing the power that we create with our body to be transferred into the knife blade and then into the rod, removing more material for the rod, creating a longer burn time. So that's where this starts to come into play. Now, the positive with this is if you have a big rod and you have something, we can even say the multi-tool saw, if you're not into the knife thing, right? And you can create a lot of long duration sparks from this set. You can take those wet materials or damp materials, okay, and with that long duration spark, dry that stuff out, make it combustible, and have it work. And you can also come down and light a cotton ball this way. You cannot, though, take that short duration spark with a little thumb striker and a small little rod and light this heavy wet stuff. All right, so with that said, that is like the overview of why we always lean towards using a bigger handled tool and a bigger ferro rod compared to anything else. And it's not because these small things don't work really well, okay? It's because if we get ourselves in situations where material is subpar and we start to move into what I would call like that advanced setting, these things become a lot more reliable for us than the small stuff. So you got to keep that in mind. Now, for the advanced users out there that already are using the large rod, are already using some type of larger scraper, and you're getting that whole spectrum met, all right, in your fire creation journey here. So you're getting damp material in adverse weather and you're getting it lit. Now we can start to train backwards, okay? So what we can start to do is we can start to implement that thumb striker with smaller rods and these materials. And what that's gonna do is it's gonna force you to start to really evaluate how you choose your natural materials out in the environment, and then how you're going to process them. And then ultimately, even if you fail, you're learning a lot from that because you're starting to be able to address the very specific issues on why things aren't working. So now when you jump back to the big handled striker, the big ferro rod, adverse weather, you have such a plethora of tools in that toolbox that you're going to get something started some way, somehow. All right, and there you go. That is my technical talk for today. Now, don't think I'm bashing these small little strikers and these small little ferro rods, even the micro stuff, and saying that this is the ultimate, because listen, they all have a place, okay? I could tell you myself, I always try in all my emergency kits, larger rod, and I always team them up with one of these, because in worst case scenario, let's just say for some reason I don't have a knife that's working too well on the backside, or I don't have a multi tool, some type of scraper is better than none. And even in smaller kits, having a small ferro rod and a small striker is better than having none. So again, you got to see where this fits in the continuum and what you're actually doing with this equipment. But having this understanding, I think, is going to help a lot of people, because this is one of those confusing topics. So at the end of the day, ferro rod, scraper, important tools. You got to get out, you got to train with them, and get a better understanding of it. So if you like this technical tip today, hit like and subscribe down below. You can also check us out over at Coalcrackerbushcraft.com for all our classes, our gear, and our blog. And until the next video, stay in the woods. I can't get over the table and getting old.